All right, good morning, good afternoon, you guys. We are going to continue with the civil rights movement, day 2. Let's get started. All right. So civil rights means equal rights for everyone. And as you guys know, you saw with the first PowerPoint that we did the other day, there were tons of problems that occurred right after the Civil War, especially in the South where there previously was slavery. Segregation began. It was very heavy in different parts. Schools were segregated, restaurants were segregated, transit systems were segregated. Then there was just tons of discrimination all around, and that basically led to a movement to fix those problems, to end those problems, and that's that. So the movement kind of starts in the 50s and 60s, but there were some events that were in the late 40s that kind of kicked it off. So that's what we're going to learn today. All right. All right, so 1947, Jackie Robinson becomes the very first Major League Baseball player, the very first African-American to participate in professional sports. At this time, we didn't have African-Americans that were in any type of professional sport, not in baseball, not in basketball, not in football. It was mainly for only whites. And he was very, very talented. He was signed professionally with the Brooklyn Dodgers. And there was a lot of resistance from everyone when he started to play professionally. And, he had a lot of challenges. People would call him ugly names. They would, wherever he would go play, like say the Dodgers, this is in New York, up there in the north, where there wasn't as much discrimination. But whenever the Dodgers would play a baseball team in the South, where there was segregation, where there was tons of discrimination, he would really experience this discrimination, and he would have to stay strong and stick it out. And because he stayed strong and stuck it out and never broke, never showed anger in the public eye, he basically became a symbol for the African-American community. And because he was so talented, that's when other baseball teams, that's when football, professional, football, basketball teams started to incorporate more African Americans on their professional teams. So he was the first to play professionally. And today, we look at today the way it is, with, Major League, basketball, with the NFL, we have tons of African Americans that play on teams. We actually might even, in some teams, there's more African Americans than there are of any other group. So this is the beginning of something great, right? So he was signed in 1947, and that same year, he becomes Rookie of the Year. And then a couple of years later, 1949, he becomes the MVP for MLB. And then a few years after that, the Dodgers win the World Series championship in 1955. So, he really shined. He was so talented. And like I said, they start to get more African Americans on professional teams because they realize that they are talented, and that they can definitely, be impactful for all types of athletic teams. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue. So that's Jackie Robinson. All right, so what struggles do you think he faced? I did mention to you that people would tell him ugly names when he was out there, like batting, and the newspapers were really ugly also with him. And the media, it was very, very challenging. There were many times that he wanted to quit, but he stuck it out because, I mean, he wanted to do this and he knew that he could, him being strong, staying strong, could encourage more African Americans to want to play professionally and encourage teams to pick up African Americans. All right, and there's a really good movie on it. You guys should watch it. It's called 42. It's all on Jackie Robinson. And I believe it has the famous, what's his name? The one who plays the Black Panther, the one who passed away. He's the one that plays Jackie Robinson in the movie. Is it Chad Bosman? Something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, 1948. We already learned this. President Truman, he's the president at the end of World War II. He goes ahead and passes this order. This is 3 years after World War II. He passes Executive Order 9981, where he desegregates the armed forces, which is the military. He integrates them because, as you guys know, during World War II, the military was segregated. We had all Black units and we had all white units. They were separate. But the Tuskegee Airmen, remember we learned about them, they really shined during World War II. They were so brave, so talented, so obedient, despite segregation in the military. They served their country proudly, even though there was a lot of opposition to them. And because of them, they basically, they basically looked great for the entire African-American community in the United States. And President Truman orders that the military be integrated. And he felt like it would be more efficient, our military, if we all work together. And this is great because after this, after he does this, that's when segregation is realized with everything, that schools are segregated, that restaurants are segregated, that buses, that trains, that everything is segregated, and it shouldn't be segregated. And this movement, the civil rights movement, really kicks off, where people start to push for integration with everything else. So this is something great that sparks the movement. And this is 1948. All right, so let's skip this question. 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. I'm out of coffee. Okay, give me 1 second. I need to get some water. Okay, so this is about a Supreme Court case. Supreme meaning the judicial branch. Here's this court case. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the entire country. And if the Supreme Court rules on something, it goes for the whole country. Like the whole country must follow it. So this is about a little girl. Her last name is Brown. And I believe her first name is Linda. I could be wrong, but it's about a little African-American girl who was probably between the ages of 9 and 13. She was from Topeka, Kansas, which is just like kind of a rural area in Kansas. And there was segregation in this, in Kansas. She used to walk miles to her all Black school. And I mean, through all types of weather, when it was hot, when it was cold, when it was rainy. I mean, her parents didn't have a vehicle, so she would walk miles to the school and miles back when there was a all-white school nearby her home, not very far. So she tried to register in that school. Her parents tried to register her and they wouldn't let her because she was Black. And that's when her parents decide to sue the school district, which that's where the name comes from, Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. They decide to sue the school district, and it makes it all the way to the Supreme Court because it's a very controversial court case. It's about segregation. You know, her parents, her family they were basically suing because they felt like their rights were being violated under the 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment means citizenship. We should all be treated equal. No group should be, discriminated. because of race, like everyone should be equal under the law if you're a citizen. So they were basically challenging that ruling, and that segregation should be considered unconstitutional in the public school system. Now, if you guys remember, we learned about the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson court case. That's the one with Plessy, who was, he lost his court case because he was trying to protest that segregation should be illegal. But that court case said that segregation is legal as long as it's equal. So 58 years later, we have this court case right here, and they are challenging segregation. They're challenging the separate but equal clause. And what they did, what attorneys from that represented Brown, the little girl, what they did was basically come to show that segregation is not equal in the public school system. They compared Black schools and white schools of the same school district, and they're like, look at this white school. And I showed you guys pictures comparing it, right? You know, the white schools had athletic teams, they had uniforms, they had desks, they had books, they had chalkboards, while the Black schools didn't have anything like that. So obviously segregation, separation of the races is not equal. That's what they proved to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court went ahead and ruled that segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. It's not right. It's not fair. It does violate the 14th Amendment. And because the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was unconstitutional, just like not only in schools, it went for everything: restaurants, restrooms, public restrooms, buses, trains, everything that contains segregation is unconstitutional, and therefore it needs to be it needs to end. Segregation needs to end, and it needs to be all integrated now. Everything needs to be integrated. So since the Supreme Court said it must follow for everyone and for everything, and it's the law of the land. So that's what happened. Plessy versus Ferguson, this court case got overturned. And I do have a video to show you guys. How do you think, especially in the South, how do you think schools, especially in the South, responded to the Brown decision? So think about that. Now the Supreme Court is saying that schools need to be integrated wherever there's segregation. Do you think the South was happy? Not at all, right? They, students, white schools, students, even staff members, parents of these white students all began to protest. They were really upset. They did not want schools to integrate. And a lot of schools were very slow to integration. So that court case was in 1954. And this is a school yearbook of one school in the South. I believe it's in Louisiana. This is in the 1970s, all right? So look at this yearbook. See if you notice anything odd. All right. So, and this is actually another teacher's yearbook, her parents' yearbook from the 1970s. There aren't any African Americans, none whatsoever in this yearbook. Why? Because this school refused to integrate. And so a lot of schools were like, well, we'll just wait until we get in trouble with the national government. We'll wait till we're warned or we're shut down or we're fined. Like, they were willing to get in trouble before integrating on their own. They didn't want to integrate. And this, I mean, this is crazy, right? This is 1970s. That court case was 1954, where they said everyone has to integrate. So that's what happened. They were very slow to integration. Like I said, there was a lot of protesting, and that's that. So what was I going to say? There's a movie on this. There's a really good movie on this. It's called Remember the Titans. You guys should definitely watch it. It's a little older, but it has Denzel Washington, and it has some pretty good actors. It's based off of a true story of a school that integrates right after the Brown court case. And, it was crazy, but the football team, it's based off of the football team, how they were forced to work together, blacks and whites, and they didn't want to, but they finally did, and they all became best friends. And the football team was just amazing. They won the state championship. And that basically is what brought the entire school together and encouraged other schools to integrate, because this school did it and they ended up being amazing. So that is that. All right, let me show you guys this video right here on, where is it? Here it is. On the Brown versus Board of Education court case.
SolarFix is celebrating the new year with huge savings. And did you know when you go solar, there's no out-of-pocket expense? You can get a 26% tax credit plus a $2,500 rebate and 0% financing with no out-of-pocket expense. We're saying no money down. So call us today for a free energy audit to see how solar works for you. 210-454-2400 or go to rooffixsa.com.
Separate but equal. For more than half a century, these three words plagued America. The doctrine, separate but equal, provided the legal basis for racial segregation in the United States from 1896 until 1954, when the Supreme Court handed down the landmark decision Brown versus Board of Education. The justices declared that segregation by law violates the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Passed just after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment guaranteed rights to all citizens regardless of color. The case, Brown versus Board of Education, was named for Oliver Brown, whose daughter was barred from attending the all-white school in their Topeka, Kansas neighborhood. In 1951, the NAACP filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of Brown and others. The following year, the Supreme Court agreed to hear that case and 4 others challenging racial segregation in schools. Collectively, the 5 were heard under the single name Brown versus Board of Education. Among those arguing for the plaintiffs was Thurgood Marshall, who would later be the first African American named to the Supreme Court. On May 17, 1954, Thurgood Marshall and his legal team scored an historic victory in the struggle for civil rights. On that day, Chief Justice Earl Warren announced the court's unanimous decision. Separate was inherently unequal and was therefore unconstitutional. The landmark ruling was met with resistance and anger across the South, and integration was slow in coming. But Brown versus Board of Education broke the back of segregation and helped spark the civil rights movement.
All right, let's go ahead and move on. So here's the little girl, Brown, that the court case revolves around. All right, let's go ahead and start answering our first question. Question 13, who was Jackie Robinson? Jackie Robinson was the first African American to play professional sports. He played Major League Baseball. All right, question 14, how did Executive Order 9981, passed by President Truman in 1948, which is after World War II, how did it spark the civil rights movement? So in other words, what did it do that basically kind of sparked the movement? So did it desegregate the military? Did it desegregate public schools? Or did it make the poll tax illegal? It's your first one. It desegregated the armed forces. Question 15, what was the ruling in the 1954 Supreme Court case Brown versus Board of Education? So what did the Supreme Court rule? Like, what was the final result in this court case? Well, they said that segregation was considered unconstitutional, therefore it is illegal in the public schools and for everything else, right? That was segregated. So it's your second one. Segregation was unconstitutional. Question 16, what part of the country is most impacted by the Brown decision? So this Brown versus Board of Education, which part of the country does this really affect? The decision to integrate the schools. Well, wherever there was segregation, which there was segregation mainly in the South, right? In the red zone. That's where everything was segregated. So that's where everything needs to now be integrated, right? So the South is your answer. Question 17, which Supreme Court case did Brown versus Board of Education overturn? So remember the court case that said that segregation is legal, is allowed as long as it's equal. So this court case, Brown versus Board, overturns which court case? Reverses which court case? And that is Plessy versus Ferguson. That's the one we learned about in 1896 that said segregation was legal, and now it's being overturned 58 years later. All right, we have a new topic, the murder of Emmett Till. So this is 1955. This is a very, very sad story. Some of you guys may have already learned it, maybe in an English class or another history class. So Emmett Till is the name of this 14-year-old African-American boy. He was from the North. I'm not sure exactly which state. I don't want to say it and then I'm wrong. But he was from a northern state and he was visiting family that lived in Mississippi, which is in the South. Now, he is from the North where there isn't segregation, there isn't a lot of discrimination. So the South is something completely different to him that he doesn't understand and he's not used to. So Emmett Till, like I said, he was in Mississippi. He was out in the market, like, you know, kind of like in the city, in town one day, and he was in a store buying something, and there was a white woman there, a young white woman. She was probably in her early 20s, and she basically accused Emmett Till, this 14-year-old boy, of making a pass at her. She claimed that he had you know, and we're not exactly sure what the claim was, but supposedly he made a pass to her, that he either whistled at her or he said something to her that was offensive, that was inappropriate, or he may have just talked to her or said hi to her or something, but that was not allowed between blacks and whites. So this is her accusation, and there isn't a lot of proof. It's a he said, she said type of thing. And so she goes and she tells her husband, she was married, and you know, this is the 50s, people married very young. She went and she told her husband and her brother, who were also in their 20s, and a couple of days later, I mean, they found out who it was that made the pass at her, right? Emmett Till. They went into his home in the middle of the night, kidnapped him, and they beat him to death. They dragged his body, they tied his body up to a car and they dragged his body for miles. Then they shot him, and then they threw his body in a river in Mississippi. So he went missing, of course, and they finally found him. They found his body in the river, and it was badly decomposed. His face was so badly decomposed, he was unrecognizable. His body had swelled up from being in the water, and his mother identified him and recognized him. And it ended up being a murder trial that happened. So here's some graphic pictures. It's horrible. I mean, you can't even recognize them. Now, most people would want a closed casket funeral because of the images, but his mother, she insisted to have an open casket. She wanted everybody to see what they do to African Americans in the South. She wanted the media to take pictures, to put it in newspapers. She wanted it to get around all around the country that this is what they did to her son. Two white people, two white men did this to her son, to her 14-year-old boy. So it was pretty bad. Everyone heard about this court case. And here are the two men, the two white men. And I'm not sure which one is the woman who accused Emmett Till of the past. But the two white men went to court. It was a huge trial. And at the end of the trial, the two men were found not guilty, which means they supposedly, the jury, the 12 people who find you guilty or not guilty, they're supposed to be random people who don't know you, who don't know anything. They can't be biased. Those 12 people found these two white guys not guilty. And why? Well, because the jury, they were all white. It wasn't even an impartial jury, which under the Sixth Amendment, they're supposed to be an impartial jury, a mixed, diverse jury, so that way there's no biasism going on. But yeah, they basically said he wasn't guilty. He didn't, or they didn't do it. So they got away with murder. It's so crazy. Now, years later, actually just recently, like not that long ago, I think it was maybe the early 2000s, they interviewed the woman who basically accused Emmett Till of making a pass. And of course, like she's a lot older by now at that point. They interviewed her and she admitted that it was all fake, that Emmett Till really didn't make a pass at her. But she didn't, so she says that she didn't realize that it would get that bad to that point, that he would be kidnapped and murdered. So she acted innocent and like it was just a joke, it was a prank, and she didn't think it would get that bad. But you don't mess around in the South. I mean, you don't, that's just wrong. She ruined his life, this family's life, and caused a big stir. But then it also shined a light on the fact that the justice system is completely flawed. And that's why it sparks immediate civil rights, because people are like, this is totally wrong. This is messed up, that white people are getting away with murder, and all it takes is one false accusation and to ruin someone's life, and they can get away with it. That's unfair. So that's what happened. All right, we're almost done. It's 1955, so this is shortly after the Emmett Till murder. So some of you guys are familiar with Rosa Parks. You've heard about her. So Rosa Parks was part of the NAACP, and we learned about the NAACP. That's the organization, the association that fights for civil rights. It's an official organization where there's attorneys that are part of this organization, and they take on court cases that have to do with civil rights. So she was part of the NAACP, Rosa Parks, and what she did was actually a staged thing. It was deliberately done on purpose with a plan in place. So they had discussed this in the NAACP, that they needed someone to do this, to give up their seat, or to refuse to give up their seat in a segregated bus system. And they knew that it would lead to an arrest, but that's all part of the plan. So she volunteered to be part of this. So Rosa Parks, as you guys know, she boarded a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, Montgomery, Alabama is the deep South. Alabama is home to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And there's a lot of discrimination that goes on in Montgomery, Alabama. Everything was segregated. So Rosa Parks boards this bus one day, and the way it was with the bus systems, all whites sit in the front of the bus, blacks sit in the back. And if you think about it, that is so messed up, right? That is so unfair that it was like that for a long time. These are Jim Crow laws. So, but if there aren't any whites sitting in the front, then an African-American can sit in the front, in the white section. But if the bus starts to fill up with whites, and who need to sit in the front, and you're an African American sitting in the front white section, then you need to give up your seat for the white person, and you need to move to the back of the bus. So Rosa Parks was sitting in a white section, and then the bus fills up that one time, and there's this white man that's standing up, and the bus driver notices this and turns around and looks at Rosa Parks and tells Rosa Parks, you need to get up and you need to move to the back so this white man can sit down. And she refused. And like I said, this is all part of the plan. She refused, and they went ahead and they called the cops. It is the law there. And they arrested her. She was taken to jail. That's her. You see, she's kind of smiling because this is something that she knew what would happen, but it's all part of the plan. And from that point on, it was all over newspapers. Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat. And it led to a bus boycott. Now, a boycott is when people refuse to do something. And Dr. Martin Luther King actually, he gave a speech, he gave an announcement to the African American community and said, we're going to boycott the buses in Montgomery, Alabama. In other words, we're going to stop riding buses, all African Americans, and we're gonna make them lose money until they realize that they're in the wrong and they integrate the bus system. So we're not riding the bus until they integrate the bus system. So, I mean, it wasn't easy for African Americans. Most African Americans in Montgomery did not have a car. So they relied on the bus system to get to work, to get home, to get to the grocery store. I mean, the majority of the people who rode buses were African Americans. So by boycotting the bus system, they really would lose a lot of money, the bus system. You know, most of their customers are Black. So, but that was the point. And, you know, people had to just wake up super early and walk all the way to work, which work could be miles and miles away. It could take hours to get to work. Same thing, people would have to just refrain from riding the bus to get home. They would get home late at night. And, you know, some African Americans had a car, so they would carpool if they could, but it was tough. And this boycott lasted a whole year because the bus system refused to integrate for over a year. And until they noticed that they lost so much money in 1 year, they're like, all right, fine, we will integrate. And it was successful. The boycott was successful. So that was the plan. And then from there, guess what? Other cities started to do the same thing. They started to boycott the bus systems all over southern cities and southern states until all the bus systems were integrated. So it's pretty interesting. That's what happened. Here she is, Rosa Parks. And some of you guys may have ridden the bus, like a public bus, and in San Antonio, and you'll notice that there is a seat in the front that has her name on it. It's dedicated to her as a symbol of what she did. So that is pretty cool. All right, we're just gonna answer these last few questions and we're done. Question 18, what happened to Emmett Till that called for immediate civil rights? Emmett Till was brutally murdered by two white men for a false accusation for making a pass at a white woman. And the two men were found not guilty, which showed that the justice system was flawed for Blacks and whites. Question 19, who was Rosa Parks? What is she known for? Rosa Parks was known for refusing to give up her seat in a bus or on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It led to her arrest, and then, which we'll stop there because there's more to it. Another question. What did the arrest of Rosa Parks lead to? Did it lead to schools being desegregated? Did it lead to massive rioting in Montgomery, Alabama, or did it lead to a bus boycott that lasted over a year until the system was integrated or desegregated? And that is your last answer right here. And that is it. We are done with today's lesson. Thank you for sticking by. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.